Hello and welcome to the AI Digest. My name is Joaquin and I am your host for today. With me is Margaret Warren, founder of MASS, Metadata Authoring Systems, and research associate for the Institute for Human and Machine Cognition. Margaret, it's a pleasure to have you today.
Thank you.
You're calling from one of your secret bases in Florida. I see you move around a lot.
Yes, I have there's no real specific reason for that, but that I often do a lot of business all the way from like Pensacola to the Cocoa Beach area. And so I'm kind of geographically usually located in one of those places.
Could you tell us a little bit more about the work that you do at Mass?
Yeah, so what we do is work on building tools for taking the informal descriptions that people have about images and trying to map those into a more formalized structure, like into a knowledge graph structure, and to disambiguate those terms and in human and machine readable type of language. And so we build tools for that, and also I do the that type of annotation, linked data based annotation on images, and I work with customers to understand better what that means. And so that's a lot of what we do: build tools, do research, and do some consulting.
And then for the IHMC Institute for Human and Machine Cognition, what are some of the projects that you've worked on in that institution?
Yeah, so one of the ones that was the most fun was one that we did actually many years ago, but it's when we first got started. Um, the institute, first of all, is behind and created something called CMAP tools, which is concept mapping
Hmm.
tools, and it's used a lot in education. And it's a nifty tool for knowledge representation, for creating nodes and edges, and there's a lot of science behind the process of using concept mapping for education particularly. But what we did was we used the tool in a sort of unusual way, which is that I'm also an artist, and we took my artwork, and I created a lot of concept maps about the artwork, so that's how we initially got started on looking very carefully at how to formalize image description, was just by taking lots and lots of concept maps of artwork, and then looking at how I describe the different parts of the image and why it was there and what it was there for, and so on. And that is what led to the incarnation of a tool that we built called, not IHMC specifically, but Metadata Authoring Systems, in association with developers at IHMC and other developers in Germany. NetEstate is another company that I collaborate with, and we started working on building tools to kind of take that work to another level. But it originated at IHMC, so I'm really fond of that project. There was a good research paper that came out of that, and about formalizing the informal. And and right now I'm looking for other projects to bring into the institute. So it can be
And
okay.
uh, so you have quite a range of hobbies. Yoga, hiking, visual arts, as you mentioned. But you also like to work in the pits of the Sports Car Club of America. So,
Well, yeah. So I've been so one of the jobs that I've had in my past is my background. I've done a lot of diverse things. I was in the Coast Guard. I did electronics. I did. I've had a very interesting and unique career path. But one of the things that I ended up doing was restoring, was running a shop that was restoring vintage Porsche automobiles. And as a result of that, I met and became interested in people who worked with these vintage Porsche cars and raced them at SCCA events. And Sports Car Club of America is basically for advanced amateurs and sort of semi-pro. It's a little bit, it's beyond hobbyist. It's beyond, going out and just sort of drag racing in the middle of the night, down your local street. It's, you actually go to the professional tracks like Daytona and Sebring and different raceways all over Road America and so on, Watkins Glen and Laguna Seca. But the clubs will rent those tracks for weekends, and people who want to race cars can come out and race the cars. Now, the cars themselves, the club started about 70 years ago, but they, it used to be more that a person would drive their car every day to work, and then on the weekend they would say, oh, we're going to go over to the track and have some track time and put on a helmet and just go out and race. Well, now it's quite a lot more complicated. There's a lot of different variation in the classes that the cars race in, and then they have, a lot of safety equipment. They're purpose-built sort of race cars that people who want to do that, want to race their cars, can get into that world and go out and participate in that. So I work with a couple of different people on a semi-regular basis. When they go out and race, I sort of go as support crew. And in fact, I have a vintage Porsche myself that one of these days, I'm hoping in 2024 to autocross it, which is like solo racing around the cones and everything. But I've tried to be out in the track myself on a my BMW on a doing something called a performance driving experience. But it's a little much for me to be on the track with a lot of other cars and stuff going by. So I'm going to try the solo thing with my Porsche.
That
Yeah.
sounds really cool.
Yeah. So that'll be fun. Yeah.
My cousin mods cars himself. He had this damn, I'm so ignorant to the model. It's this gem of a car. It's a Japanese. He imported it to El Salvador.
A Miata? Is it a Mazda Miata or no? No.
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 I'm gonna have to get back to you on that one. But
Yeah.
he basically he abused it so much, and he really didn't maintain the engine, that the pistons exploded and cracked the engine. So
Yeah.
he had to rebuild the engine from scratch. He bore
Yeah.
bigger holes, put bigger pistons, and made it a meaner machine.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, I think this is kind of getting us
A
a
little askew. Yeah.
little askew,
Yeah.
but it's on point because it's with your diverse interest in automotive and all these different areas, you have also a deeper appreciation for how these vehicles have such a wide range of components, and how those components have evolved over time, and how we describe them as people, and why we aren't describing them to machines like Amazon or eBay or even search engines, so that we can readily find these parts in a more accessible way, right?
Right. Right. It's a very complex domain to describe. The entire automotive industry, I really is, there's just so many facets of it. There's not just like the hobbyists who race their cars and want to work on their cars, but there's just, I'm sure a lot of people, have the image of their, someone in their family, a grandparent, replacing a starter in their garage, working on their car on the weekend. So there's that kind of people. There's all the way to professional restorers, professional race car drivers. There's the whole industry is just huge, uh, and so and it's like any specialist domain. I mean, there's so many specialist domains in the world, like people who love to work on clocks, or people who work on radios, or restore old vintage radios or guitars or things like that. There's these deep reserves of knowledge that are sort of like, they're public knowledge, but they're not
being diffused.
stored in the way, well, they're not often stored in a way, for many complex reasons, which I'm sure we're going to get into today, that they're not stored in a way that makes them really truly easy to find or to talk about, on the web. There's lots of it out there. There's just loads and loads and loads of material out there about all of these different industries, but it is difficult often to find the material that you're looking for. Like, an example of this is that, well, let me think of a really good. So when I was running the restoration company, I would often get people who would call, and other restorers would say, Margaret, we're looking for an image of a particular model of Porsche, like a 1952 Porsche, that we want to see how the upholstery goes together at the bottom of at the A-pillar, like where it attaches, to the car on the passenger side, and then it'd be a very specific question. Now, that kind of query is just absolutely unbelievably difficult to find on Google or anywhere. And, it's what's called one of the long, quote unquote, image in the long tail, in the statistical long tail, that is very hard to find. And even just finding that car model itself is often just the research results are very non-specific. Because often, Google is skewed to commerce and product sale. If you start looking for a query like a 1952 Porsche Pre-A Cabriolet, that phrase right there is just, you're going to get a lot of results that may or may not actually be that car. And you may get a lot of results that are similar, but maybe come from a page, but there's nothing that really, it has to have that exact string of text with it. And you could reformulate that phrase of text like 100 different ways and still be talking about the same car. So, so then you end up getting a lot of things related maybe to Porsche, automobiles, to older Porsche automobiles, but all of it is kind of related to sales information, not necessarily the kind of thing where I'm trying to see what this one specific area of this car looks like. I need a detail about this car. I need to see this particular engine, and so on. So, so that's the kind of content that I really like to work with, is that deep level of describing those type of images with the type of detail that if you structure it in both human and machine readable ways, then it should be, easier for Google and other search engines to actually to really pinpoint that, like, I think that structured data is like, we talk about finding a needle in a haystack. And I used the metaphor the other day that when you're able to add structured data to image description, it's like creating a magnet that pulls that needle out of the haystack. And so that's what I like to work on, is trying to get those types of descriptions on images.
What I find fascinating about the work that you do, your area of expertise being formalizing unstructured image description into structured data, is that you really need to have a deep appreciation for how nebulous and how shapeless, and how you have to kind of go dig and through the filing system of people's brains, to be able to acknowledge how they perceive the world, acknowledge that their experiences are valid, and then consolidate all these different little pockets of knowledge into one um, formalized system. I mean, it's quite a tall order of things to do, and it's never complete because it's ever expanding, and you need to keep humans in the loop for those kinds of knowledge bases.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's a shame. I remember once going to a motel somewhere in uh, Wisconsin, I think, and it was involved with a racing event. That's why I was there. But in the hotel, they had a fascinating image collection of the fishing industry on Lake Superior in the 1920s. And they had these great pictures with these pictures of tools that were being used, and the fishermen were using different types of tools. And like, I wanted to know more about those tools, and some of those tools, they're obsolete. We have tools that we don't need to use anymore. Or there's specialist tools for working on early Porsche motors that are very rare. They're very hard to find. They're still desirable, but it's kind of interesting to look at the history of the world and think, wouldn't it be great if we had a knowledge graph of, like, if we had a knowledge graph that had gone with how the Egyptian built the pyramids, it would be, we would be able to understand that a lot better, right? We wouldn't be just guessing. I think it's really, really fascinating to kind of save this really, um, uh, what I think is very fascinating and important um, knowledge about our culture, about our tools, about how we use our tools, and save that into structured language. So maybe it can be preserved longer and understood longer for a longer period of time, right? Like,
So, sort
yeah.
of preserving documentation of artifacts with the semantics, with the context, with the
Mhm,
lineage, and included in that documentation,
mhm, mhm,
because everything's a living organisms, and the
mhm.
documentation is merely a snapshot into that one particular instance in time of that thing.
Yeah, and interestingly, so on the other side of this, images provide a great source of the ground truth of what something is. It's a lot of times, of course, there's the old adage, a picture's worth 1,000 words. But when I show you, I can describe things all day long, but when I show you a picture of what I mean, sometimes it's like, then the light comes on, right? And also, we can have agreement about what that thing is. If I show you a picture of a part, and I can get several subject matter experts to all agree and say, oh yes, this part is a carburetor that came off of this car or whatever. Or if I have several um, several geologists agree to what type of a rock something is, and they all look at the same image and can agree on that, then we have now established a kind of a ground truth for what that is. And that's kind of really important today because, we have these large language models, and, even as impressive, crazily impressive as the clip system, in that goes along with the vision component of the chat GPTs and everything, is that, it can give us some pretty amazing information about what's in an image, but it cannot necessarily get deep into these type of specialist domains and really confirm this is like a ground truth about this is what this thing really is, right? So yeah, it's yeah, it's a very interesting time, yeah, to look at all of these different aspects of image description.
let's talk about that. Before we started the recording, we went over 3 or 4 key areas of your specialized knowledge, and embedded metadata is a very big component of how devices capture metadata into the images they take, video or otherwise, right?
Yeah. So I often say that I place my work, if you imagine a little Venn diagram, I put my work right at the center of embedded metadata, data centric AI, and knowledge graph. And knowledge graph techniques. So, but it's all about image description. And um, so embedded metadata, a lot of people only think of that as the EXIF data. The EXIF data is the type of data that your camera might add. It can add, if you're using a smartphone, it can add your GPS or a GPS enabled camera. You can use uh, you can get GPS data, you can get your camera model. If you use a scanner, you can get this model of the scanner. You can have it put date time information and date time stamp. Um, the cutting edge of this EXIF data is, or data that's like EXIF data, is that the Content Authenticity Initiative is a group that's creating tools as part of the C2PA that are also embedding like content origin information into images so that the provenance can be tracked. And that's another topic, but that's another component, a facet of embedded metadata techniques. But also something that people often forget about, and but has been around for a really long time. It's been around since the beginning of when the images were being sent over wire services from, from like a local newspaper to a more global market, or vice versa, via Reuters or Associated Press. And that is the IPTC metadata, photo metadata. And there's an awful lot of fields that can be embedded into images that can contain descriptive metadata, and sort of the who created it, why it was created. It originally started out being more about the caption, the headline, who took the photo, who was sort of responsible for publishing it, publisher information, and it has grown. I'm part of the IPTC, International Press and Telecommunications Council Photo Metadata Working Group, and they are still actively working on all the time on adding fields for embedded metadata. In fact, they've the most recent fields have been added is, one has been alt text, which is for really communicating the information for accessibility for screen readers, and allowing that information to travel with an image through different workflows. So anything that can read embedded metadata will be able to use that alt text that's been embedded in the image. They've also been working on adding fields for opting out of being included in large vision model data sets scraping. Not sure whether, we still don't really know how this is going to work. If any, there's a lot of that under litigation right now about whether or not the big companies like Stable Diffusion and Midjourney and so on have the right to have the images that they have in their collections, when many of those are copywritten. And so the idea of putting in some fields that someone someday might recognize, that would filter, be able to filter those out and say, we don't want these images included in this data set, could also be included in an image. Also, there's like a digital source type field that is all about describing whether an image was originated as an AI generated image or
Yes.
something else. So that's all aspects of embedded metadata.
That's a
A
hot
lot of
topic.
detail on that. Um, then, uh, then, as far as the data centric AI, this is something I'm fascinated in because I think in general the entire data centric AI movement is all about um, uh, getting better data to begin with to go into machine learning models and what that really means, like getting cleaner data, getting more refined data, using using as few data points as you can to get the best results out of the machine learning model. So, for example, a lot of machine learning and computer vision uh, machine learning revolves around like uh, taking a large data set full of images that have labels on them or not. Some are just to not have labels at all. But the real research is in manipulating the model, but not necessarily looking at the data that leads to better results. And so this is all about setting benchmarks and setting new sort of workflows for training those machine learning models to have better performance. And so I work on some of those challenges as well that are around vision. And recently participated in one where, we were working on refining like the classifications of um, certain classes, the prediction of certain classes, and trying to get better performance using less data. So that's data centric AI techniques, and then there's knowledge graphs. So one of the tools that we created with Metadata Authoring Systems is image snippets, and it's the best known. And it's an entire system really for describing images with structured data, and in particular linked data. So what that means is that we connect um, what you would normally say about an image, keywords, or how you would describe an image, like this picture is a cardinal sitting on a fence, so on and so forth. And in the background are mountains, and it's in Colorado and whatever. You take that information and store that as in a triple store using RDF, which is Resource Description Framework language, and store that data um, uh, with links to the linked data entities for those objects. So, and for the information in that description. So, for example, I can link I could link the word cardinal to the description of that cardinal in either DBpedia or Wikidata, which are both structured data, huge, like basically like encyclopedias of information, but written in structured data language for machines to understand. And I can say that that is a cardinal, as in a cardinal, the bird, and not a baseball player from the team in St. Louis, or not a picture of a cardinal on the back of a uniform from the of the player. I can actually say this. No, this is a real cardinal. So I can kind of ground that image to an entity, to a real entity, and that gets back to the things instead of strings concept. So it's not just the string, the letters cardinal, but it's actually disambiguated by connecting it to to an
Encyclopedia.
entity that describes that. And not only does it describe that entity, but it also connects it to like superclasses, or to other versions of that so it knows that a cardinal is a bird, for example, and
Mhm.
it knows, or it knows that that uh, that a loom is a textile arts tool, or it can do some reasoning and using the knowledge graph. So I sort of see my work as the intersection of all of that: embedded metadata, data-centric AI, and knowledge graphs. It's a bit dense, but
No, I love it. It's a complex dance, and it's rich, and it's gonna allow us to take computer vision to the next level. I mean, it's important work that you're doing. So I just like to go through a quick tangent because we've had a conversation on this through LinkedIn before, where technology companies or cell phone manufacturers, they have features now, and even ChatGPT and things like that, where you can create synthetic images,
Mhm,
right? You can take a collection of images that are real,
mhm,
and they come from people and they come from real devices, and then they can be kind of like jumbled up, and based on how you direct the flow of your prompt or your inspiration, the machine will spit out something that seems realistic. And you can even go as far as taking an image of someone and embedding them into a image and composing a synthetic
mhm,
um, a synthetic situation because
mhm.
it's falsifying memories, right?
Yeah, there's a lot to this to talk about. What angle do you want to start with?
No, it's just I mean, you're trying to reason with organic knowledge, and now we're introducing synthetic knowledge and
Yeah,
into the mix. What are your thoughts on that? We don't have to go
yeah,
so deep
so
into
many.
that.
Well, I mean, there are disturbing things that are happening. There's synthetic images showing up at the top of Google search results for in place of real people and real situations. There's one of the worst ones I saw was that an AI generated selfie ended up as the first result in a search for the tank man at the Tiananmen Square image, which is an iconic image in our contemporary culture. For most of us, we've been exposed to this. We have these names for these images that, an older one is like, there's an iconic kiss photograph that this is terrible that I can't remember the photographer's name, but um, before World War II, or it was after World War II, and I think that the at the end of World War II, the soldier or the whatever in uniform, someone in uniform is grabbing and kissing a nurse or something like this, in a big embrace. We have these iconic images, right, in our culture, and so it's kind of disturbing to hear that that's the first thing that comes up when you search for, tank man Tiananmen Square, which was a very traumatic and intense, event. And that's now showing up as an AI generated selfie as the first result. Now, um, I so there's that happening. That's sort of disturbing. I myself do have a real strong um, drive to want to represent things,
True.
information accurately and truth. And we know. I mean, we've been having discussions about images and truth going all the way back to Plato, right? But so it is hard to find quote unquote truth,
Right. It's all
anywhere.
subjective based on the
Very
person that put
subjective.
the
Right. But I do think that that we operate every day in this physical world based on some shared understandings of what truth is. And I think that sometimes these hallucinations sort of are um they're it makes one wonder what is going to happen to truth in a much bigger at a much bigger in a much bigger way. It makes one wonder if we're just if life is sort of going to become one big, large mashup of things you can't really trust or hang on to or really believe in, because I saw an ad on Thanksgiving Day, the Macy's parade, and Google had an ad for Google Magic, and they now it's really impressive technology. You can like fix people's faces in group photos, and you could do automatically, and you could do all kinds of wonderful, magical things. But so, for example, she in the ad, there was the Radio City Rockettes were dancing on a stage, and which was in the street because it was in the parade. But then the woman in the ad, she pans over to the little girl, her daughter, who's imitating the kicks. She highlights the daughter and drags her over and puts her in the lineup with the Rockettes. And it's really cute. You have to say, it's super cute. But then I think to myself, wow, like what's going to happen 50 years from now when she looks at that? Is that going to create like a false memory that she had of dancing with on the street with the, that she got to do this? Because I know I'm also presently working on an archival project with a lot of family photos, and not just that, but my father was a photojournalist for a newspaper in the 70s, and I have his archives that are sort of important to preserve. So I'm working on preserving those archives. He was like nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. He did a lot of sort of groundbreaking things in photojournalism in the 70s. So, but anyway, I'm doing like this whole history of looking at negatives from my past. And it seems kind of important to me that when I look at an image from when I was 5 years old, that it was accurate, that it sort of has something, it means something personally to me to be able to reconcile my memories with this image that I see, since it exists. I mean, a lot of people don't have as many images as I have in their family background. And we all know that we can create false memories all the time. I mean, we do it all the time. There's a lot of data on that, of how accurate are things that happen in courtrooms, like months after an event has happened, or even years after. How much do you really remember? How much have you changed your memory based on other information you've heard? So I don't necessarily think that images, that the sort of the creation of these images as a, I don't want to say that I'm anti the technology, because I'm not. I think the tools are fascinating, but I think there's a lot of things about the tools that bother me. It bothers me that a lot of copywritten works were scraped, like a lot of, um, you know, uh, a lot of creators and a lot of artists, I think, have the right to assert what they want to happen with their image when they put it on the web. And
Theft. It's digital theft. I
it's
mean,
it's digital, yeah. And there's these companies have created this product that is certainly doing magical things, but it's
profiteering off of the intellectual property of many, many, many people.
yeah, and I don't like that, and I don't you know I, yeah, it's just a big topic. It's a big topic what we're doing, creating all of these, you know fake imagery, and then how it's getting used. But then a lot of that points to the human behavior. It points to, and it points to habits that we've created over the past 30 years of the web, that what I believe to be really poor metadata habits. I think a we've created a culture of just being able to share whatever you want to share really fast, not thinking about what you're going to share, just uploading whatever spur of the moment emotional thing you're going through, or whatever you post it up on the web. There's, and you don't put any metadata, no context about why you made the image, or the intention behind how you're sharing it, and so on. And I think that's where the real problem comes from. And again, it's sort of, how do we get back to kind of being concerned with each other as human beings about how we're representing the truth with images, and so on.
If,
So
if I may own an opinion, and I'm gonna own it and segregate it from you,
right.
this is my opinion.
Uh-huh.
I think synthetic images are like cigarettes. It may feel good to do it. It may make you look cool. Um, whatever judgment we can place on that, vanity or lying or whatever, any kind of negative association, who cares? But it should have, as you said, embedded metadata or some visual symbol, or like legally enforced by the federal government and many different organizations, and filtered through social media to ensure that we are not um, lying at scale, building propaganda at scale, because it's fun to create fake images. It's silly, it's cool, it's interesting, and it goes into creativity, but where it perverts the human memory, human, like, images, culture, media, that is part of our collective memory. When people inject viruses that are fake images, if it's out of the context of comedy or satire or things like that, then it's a real big problem.
it,
And
it's
deep
a
fake, deep fakes are a big problem, where you can take possession of somebody's voice,
Mhm,
and their likeness,
mhm,
and then produce a text to speech or a video to speech
mhm.
representation of that person
Yeah.
without their consent
Mhm,
into any kind of positive or malicious intent.
mhm.
Nevertheless, it's still kind of like a weird, a very creepy, hyper realistic representation of that person.
Yes.
So
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's a really big topic. I mean, there's so much creativity, uh, that you can do with the tools. And again, I think it's like how you use them, and then how you regulate them. And uh, it's interesting. I mean, and of course there's the arguments where people say, well, every new technology that's come along, people have thought that it would pervert culture, or that it would do something bad. And maybe it has all along. Who knows? You go back and you say, well, what would have happened if the printing press had been regulated or stomped out, like what would have happened then. We don't really know. But we feel like it's the world is better because of it. We feel like the world is much better because of the technology we keep creating. And that's kind of like one of the it's kind of like how we operate. We operate right now in this sort of idea of just sort of free being free to create and free to work on whatever we want to work on and build these tools. Um and they're fascinating, but but there are some serious problems because of exactly what you were saying: the propaganda, the dissemination of memes that are false, um all of the misinformation. And um, I keep coming back to the metadata, which is like slow. And the idea, and this is, I'm not the first person to say this, you need to have, I believe there needs to be more friction in the process of being able to put content online, just to make it a little bit harder and a little
I
bit
agree.
more, to where you're capturing a little bit more information every time something is shared. But that's a big challenge, and we're not going in that direction. I mean, with the LLMs and the chat GPTs and the large vision models and all of that, we're not the unfortunately, we're not going in that direction. I mean, I would like to see metadata have an entire paradigm shift, right? I mean, we've had a paradigm shift with chat GPT. I'd like to now see to balance it out by having a big shift towards more metadata. I like to tell the story that I can recall when I was young and my father worked in a newsroom as a photojournalist. And he would go out and make photos and bring them back of an event. And say he went to a governor's press conference or something, and there was some really interesting topic being discussed and maybe some opposition there to him or what have you. And there were interesting angles and interesting photos of people and who was talking to whom and why and what have you. And, when my father would come back, he would be there with the managing editors. And, a newspaper would have its own editorial slant. It does have a bias, we know, and it would usually, that bias would be published. People understood what kind of content they were what kind of bias they were going to get with that paper. I mean, with an emphasis on, quote unquote truth, but an understanding of who the people are sort of managing it, right? And then that information would, so they would pick which images they wanted to run with a news story and what that news story was going to convey. And then when the image ran, it would have underneath the image the caption to explain who was in the photo, and then who made the photo. And it would have a lot of information that actually matched that image to that content. And so you could trust that. You could trust that whole entire provenance. And all that changed with the web. And I can remember that you would go to like the advertising section, and that's when truth was not quite as important, right? So if you were talking about a mattress made with bamboo, you could put a picture of a bamboo tree, and it didn't really matter that the bamboo tree was not the same bamboo tree that was used to produce the mattress, right? That doesn't matter.
Or for food, where they do like
Yeah.
some completely inedible substances that look really photogenic.
Oh yeah. They put glue and stuff and make the chocolate syrup look thicker, and all kinds of crazy stuff. Yeah, it's illustrative. It's not and it's not, you don't expect it to match the truth. But then, the web came along and we started mixing
Confusing.
that all up.
Yeah.
So the metadata. I mean, there's just a point in time where people dropped a lot of good metadata habits, and that were really good and really clear, and they dropped them, in order to, get the story out fast. Let's illustrate the story. We want clickbait. We want headlines. We want, to bring people in. So we're just going to use any old picture of a crowded beach from 1990 to illustrate, people going out on the beach during COVID when it wasn't even truthful, right? So like, a lot of that type of information was happening. Now, I think, the Content Authenticity Initiative is really behind trying to get a workflow that goes straight from camera to publication. And it's interesting for a lot of ways, because the goal is to sort of track provenance from the from the absolute origin of an image, and then make sure that what gets disseminated. I have I'm sort of watching to see how that evolves, how that technology evolves, because I also worry about I worry about, on the other side of the coin, one voice getting to be the voice that tells you what truth is.
Yeah.
And
That's a situation that we already kind
it's
of
a
partially
different
lived in.
situation. Yeah. And then I worry about a little bit about some of the other types of metadata, not necessarily the way that it's going to we're having to see how the technology evolves in that, like because I've always been on the side of the coin that believes in being able to edit your own metadata, and which can be problematic even in itself. People can inject, viruses and stuff into images with embedded metadata. So that's, there's a lot of reasons why large social media companies decided, a while ago to just completely strip it. There's a lot of problems. There's like, there's people, there's privacy problems that people citate. But again, that comes back to, like the creating the friction to understand what it is that is getting uploaded to begin with and how accurate that is. And
If
yeah,
you want to lie, you can lie with whatever crude materials you want. I mean, if you really want to set up a scene with props and models and
right,
actors and hyper realistic situations,
right.
you can do that if you want to. It's just going to be a little bit more effort.
Well,
But
people have been faking, ghost pictures with, ectoplasm and stuff for years too. Like, yeah, I mean, without having, they didn't need AI to do that, right? So,
it's
yeah,
just more powerful now.
yeah, right.
I do want to bring it back to sort of the work that you're doing. I believe me, I love this conversation, and
It's really good.
I hope it wasn't like overly negative, but we do have to talk about our perspectives in this area because it is a legitimate source of
Oh, sure.
concern for our humanity.
Yeah, yeah.
But damn, we were gonna talk about we talked about your expertise, and that was gonna segue into I don't know. I lost my train of thought.
Oh, no.
XMD. Can you tech me through XMD or is it XMP?
XMP. Well, that's
XMP.
just and the storage format for like the IPTC XMP or Adobe XMP rather. It was a way of it's sort of the technical specification behind the extensible metadata platform for embedding the metadata in the images, and which has been there all along. I mean, and that was originated back with the work when the
Published.
IPCC was transmitting images over the wire, like Reuters or Associated Press and so on. So that and then now that work continues, and all of these fields are available to use in tools.
Here's where I pick up the train of thought. So we were talking about we went from publishing and we needed to articulate things people to people.
Mhm.
Hey, I'm gonna send you an image. It's gonna come in the mail. Blah blah blah. You can use it for this story, this publishing. It comes with all these attributes, descriptions, metadata. Great, have at it. Right? Comes out in the newspaper. With the advent of the internet, that became a lot easier. And then we talked about now when you describe an image on a WordPress or like some domain that you have more control over describing an image with alternative text, uh, it's still a long form that does not do justice for classifying or adding attributes or tagging specific actors because unstructured data is infamously difficult to be parsed by machines.
Yes.
And then I asked you, what the hell do you put in that box? What do I write to describe an image? And you said what, why, when, where, how, right?
Yeah, well, so this was kind of the origination, the original thoughts that I had behind creating the image snippets tool to begin with, which was to be able to create triples about uh, from image description. So if you take a description in plain text,
I just want to add to triples. If anybody's listening and you have no idea what the hell's going on, triples is a representation of one piece of knowledge, an atomic representation that has an association between a subject and an object, as
yes,
you would in a sentence, and then a verb or some sort of relationship between that. Johnny has an apple would be a triple.
yes,
Uh,
or
okay.
this image depicts cardinal. Like
Mhm.
that's the subject is the image. There's a relationship that says that there's a cardinal in the picture and it's depicted by the picture. So the
Cardinal
subject,
is a bird.
predicate, object. Yeah. Subject, predicate, object. So this is the basis behind what's called the RDF, which is a type of syntax used to represent knowledge about resources, and so it could be about any resources. And so um, RDF is just one knowledge graphing technique. There's many. This is the the technique that we chose to use to talk about images.
It's
For a
internationally
lot of
recognized.
reasons. Was
It's
that?
internationally recognized as a
It
standard.
is. It's a standard that it's kind of like using the same alphabet in a
Mhm.
way. It's like, oh, we're going to use the same alphabet to talk about subject, object, predicate, subject, relationship, or properties. A lot of people use different words for the connection
Abstract. Yeah.
between the subject and the object. But so so what I said was, originally we started talking about, like, let's just take what would potentially normally be keywords, but it's more than that. It's more like actually dissecting the description itself. So if I have a plain text description that says, um, in the image we see a cardinal and it's eating food out of a bird feeder, and the bird feeder is covered with snow, and there's mountains in the background behind the image. A lot of people would be tempted to take that image and create a number of keywords. They would say cardinal, birds, snow, bird feeder, mountains, and that just sort of gives like a flat, like there's no representation, right? And
Right.
you can even do what's called disambiguating those terms, so that that you're talking about a cardinal, a bird,
Mhm.
and you know what a bird feeder is, and you know what you could take those terms and you can turn those into linked data. But you know my thinking was we could always go deeper than that, that we could also go to uh, to determine a relationship between that word and the image. So, like, what's the main thing being depicted? Because if you just use all the same relationship depicts, then it's like, this image depicts mountains. Well, it doesn't depict mountains. Mountains are there, though. Mountains are in the background. So imagine actually being able to want to find a picture that says, I want a picture of a bird on a bird feeder with mountains in the background and snow on it. And it's like, okay, so I want to find an image with all of those parameters. Well, you may or may not be able to find that if you sort of Google that query, right? I want a picture of a bird on a bird feeder. You can make the image. You can make it now faster, right? That image with AI. You can put in the prompt into Stable Diffusion and just say, I want a cardinal sitting on a bird feeder in the snow with the mountains in the background. You'll get that. Will it be exactly the same truthful image that I may have made in my yard, or at my house? And that's important to me, that I want to find that picture. Yeah. So, and I like to use another example, about this, is that if I say I want a picture of a sunset over the Atlantic Ocean from Melbourne, Florida, uh, if you put that query in and you get any pictures of sun over the water that are not pointing west, you're it's the wrong picture, right? So this gets back to wanting to be able to believe what you see, because if you're in Melbourne, Florida, which is the central east coast, and you're looking towards the Atlantic Ocean, the sun is setting behind you, so you're not going to see the sun in that photo, right? So it kind of comes down to the sort of the truth. And I think that's the kind of thing that we could have been able to actually find a long time ago, if there were more of an emphasis again on metadata, if there was more of an emphasis on day, time, location, that type of information. We have the technology. We're pouring millions and millions of dollars into making fake images, but
Hmm.
we could actually be pouring that same amount of money and effort into
Even a fraction would go a long way.
fraction would go a long way. I'm looking for funding, by the way, if anyone's interested in working more on these types of problems, on like describing complex images. But yeah,
There's a community called All Tech is Human.
yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, no,
Mhm.
maybe you can find somebody there that would be interested. I mean, there's a lot of people doing research into ethics, but I digress.
Yeah, yeah. This is digressing. We were actually talking about
Image snippets, and
yeah,
then
we were talking about the relationship between the image and that you can go a little bit further than depicts. And so a lot of my research has been in um, doing sort of what's the hardest possible thing to do, which is to take this natural language and turn it into triples. And I'm very, very fortunate to work with a colleague who worked on the semantics of RDF, uh, Dr. Pat Hayes, who helped together, the two of us created what's called we call it the lightweight image ontology. And it's a small ontology of just 11 terms that helps disambiguate the relationship of the what would be whatever word you're describing. For example, in the example I was using a minute ago, the cardinal, when the bird feeder in the mountains, is the mountains are in the background. And so there's a relationship to say that the mountains are in the background. This image has in the background mountains. Okay, so they're not the main thing being depicted, that the bird is the main thing to being depicted. So you're not using the same relationship for every single word, for every single, what might be a keyword, right?
they have
Um,
different weight. They have different weight in terms of the composition.
yeah, it's different weight. Um, and it's a different relationship, and we have a term that's an unusual term called like uses pictorially, which sounds more complicated than it is. It just means that I'm actually talking about a real bird instead of an illustration of a card. It's not a drawing of a cardinal. It's a
The representation of the concept
yeah,
is medium. So like
right. Yeah.
painted. Okay,
Right.
interesting.
So a pictorial representation would be something that is painted. So it's a simple distinction to use. And sometimes, and we can create other relationships. So the tool is made so that you can create relationships on the fly. Like, you don't have to stick to those 11 terms, but the idea is that when you're trying to add structure to natural language, there's a reason for adding that structure, because then it makes it easier to like reverse engineer it and actually use it when you're want to go find things, with that description. So yeah, so anyway, so that's sort of the work behind, that's where I see my work is really in, you know, so um, there's a lot of schemas out there, including schema.org, where you can describe like, what is this image about? What are things that it mentions? What are things that may, be associated with the image? But that about field is typically still all
Nebulous. It's a
it's
unstructured.
still all unstructured free text.
You
And
need some
yeah,
framework to orient the minds of people
right,
that may or may not be aware or trained or knowledgeable
right.
about.
Right. And I mean, I just feel like sometimes it gets very frustrating, because I feel like if we had gone back to where Tim Berners-Lee wanted to go, and others, and other researchers in the early 2000s, late 1990s and early 2000s with the web, and go to strings, not things. As I mean, I'm sorry, from things to strings. I said it the wrong way. It's funny. Things, not strings. Represent strings as actual things, and that's a meme that's often used. But the thing is that the implementation of the web just kept going a different trajectory away from that. It's like, first let's strip all the metadata. Now let's, and there were reasons for that. There are reasons for stripping metadata then. I think that they were overly, it's sort of like, let's cut off our nose to spite our face, kind of. Yeah, it's sort of like,
let's produce content, let's get it out there,
let's
let's
just get it out there. We
commercial
don't,
intentions.
I mean, we know that there are bad actors who would take location data in images and use it. You know, there's stalkers, there's pedophiles, there's, you know, bad actors who would misuse it. But I think iNaturalist has a really good way of dealing with that. When you upload an image to iNaturalist, they they let you choose sort of the level of opacity on the location. You can actually leave the actual location where you were when you made the image of a specimen, but they can also just narrow it down to a generic, you know, like it was London, somewhere in London, or it was somewhere in the UK. And you can, and you know, I feel like that could have been done a long time ago in many different ways. I also think that the fear mongering of metadata was a little bit, um, you know, over the top. I think, you know, oh, you should turn this off on your phone. You could be telling people where you are. Well, people are uploading images of themselves on the beach in Bali, and they, you know, it's funny, you create this condition where you ask someone, would you like to, you know, reveal your location data? No, 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 I don't want my
You're
location.
taking the picture and
Right.
that
But then
specific
they'll turn
location.
around in their Instagram post and say, "Oh, we had a nice cocktail on the beach in Bali yesterday." You know, I mean, they're, you know, so people are, you know, it's difficult cognitively to process your representation of yourself on the web when you're uploading images, right? So people want to, so if you're a social media company wanting to get as much content as possible, the simplest thing to do is to strip all the metadata and just not have to put that choice in front of someone, because it is difficult. It prevents it, you know, it is a cognitive struggle. You know, when I use the word metadata, um, at a conference I was at Google in 2015, I'll never forget that there were several people who came up to me who's like, and I said, you know, it's a metadata management system, and they're like, oh, God, don't call it that. Nobody wants to talk about metadata, you know, and it's like, we really need to change, you know, change that thinking. I mean, even my father, you know, photojournalist, towards the end of his life, I was sitting down with him all the time to get him to, you know, describe the images he made to me, you know, like, where were you when you took this photo, and why did you take it, and, you know, what, you know, do you remember anything about the person, and right,
It's
and I'm trying to
painful.
get him,
It's
and
painful to extract that information because it's such a
yeah,
nuance. You got to be specific.
yeah, yeah. There's a video that a friend of mine and I ran into the other day that is it was um, it's a video of a little boy, a little boy in China or somewhere. He's making like a propaganda type video to basically say, you know, we are good people. We don't eat, you know, animal, like we don't eat, you know, pets, and we don't eat, you know, we're good. It was like around the time of
COVID.
yeah, no, this is in the 50s. This is way back.
Okay, okay.
And what's interesting is that it's a bit of a heartbreaking video. It was just shared on Twitter not too long ago, and it's a heartbreaking video because he's really trying to explain his culture to America, to,
Outside
you know,
parties.
North America, right? And he's to the United States, and people in the United States, and but what I had trouble finding was like, why was this film made? Like, what was the intent? Who made it? And what was the intent behind that piece of video being made? And I think that's kind of that's interesting things that are, and that's hard to get out of people. You know, nobody wants to explain why they're uploading something to Instagram. Like, well, I really want to show off in front of my, somebody that I knew in high school that was, like, I mean, like, that's why I'm uploading this picture of, my daughter or something in her prom dress, is like, oh, look, nobody wants to actually say that sort of
Yeah,
thing.
I think that requires a certain amount of self-awareness,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
we don't all possess that. I think some
Mhm.
of us are less self-aware. Yeah.
Right.
Anyways, there's three. If you still have time, there's three areas I'd like to discuss. Given the richness of this conversation,
Sure.
I'd hate to just break it off at where we're at right now. But automotive, botany, and geospatial information systems. So automotive is, as you know, as we have talked about, such a complex world that's evolved over time with manufacturing techniques, model constructions,
Mhm.
access to materials, access to alloys, designers, inspiration, the variation of craftsmen from different regions and different components being made by hand or by machine or combinations of both, modded, customized
Yeah, that's
parts,
mhm.
which are very niche and super specialized areas.
Yeah.
Um, this is a crazy, 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 crazy
It's a
domain.
crazy rich domain to talk about. Yes, it really is. Yeah. Um, so what do you want to know more specifically
How
about
does it?
image
How,
distribution?
how would imaging play a role here in automotive? I see you posting on LinkedIn. Here's a automotive part, and it belongs to this model car, and it can also be used in these other areas. And here's where you can find it. How do you wrestle with that?
Um, well, I think in that case, linked data really helps. That's where the knowledge graph comes in, right? It's that I think a lot of these images are things that I believe that large computer vision models are going to have a hard time with for years to come still, without some sort of knowledge graph techniques. And I keep trying to find the ultimate use case that says, oh, look, there's no way that these neurosymbolic methods or these neural net methods can um, um, you know, like answer this, can describe this image ever, so uh, so much of that knowledge is it's specialist. It needs a subject matter expert to describe it to begin with. And even like the component that I uploaded, so I upload this picture of a part, and it's an intake manifold. Now it happens to be an incredibly special, rare intake manifold. There were probably maybe 50 to 100 motors maybe that had this particular intake manifold on it, um, because it was made during a transition period for Porsche. It's all wrapped up in kind of Porsche history and so on. That being said, there are people who may want to look for that, find it, discuss it, whatever. It's like, wow, I found this rare part in this box. Does anybody know what it is? Kind of thing. And the angle that I even uploaded the image to LinkedIn at is like an unusual angle, because you can't see where the bolt pattern, and the bolt pattern is like important to the component. And um, the so like so the thing is that, one, you have to have a knowledge of the material itself, like the images itself. Like
Mhm.
there's a lot of metadata around that, like what folder was it in, what car was it associated, a lot of subject matter expertise that involves like actually being there when the images were made, right?
Mhm.
And but that's nevertheless really important to capture, because now I have this part. I've now identified it with a knowledge graph technique. I've now identified it as being part of a Porsche, and so on. But, if I put that image into Google Lens, for example, it will identify it as an intake manifold. Basically, I mean, it'll find 100 other intake manifolds that look pretty much like it from all kinds of motors, but it's not going to be that one, that motor. It's not going to be that Porsche motor. It's going to be maybe a Honda or or something else. It's going to be some other kind of car that looks similar. So, that type of thing is really, you're going to have the descriptive metadata no matter what. I put the image into the Bing GPT and said, "What is this?" And now I could not get Bing GPT to reliably describe it every single time. Like the first time I asked it, I was kind of blown away. It said, "It's an intake manifold. This is the function of an intake manifold, etc." It looks like it's been used. It doesn't look, shiny and new. The surface, the metallic surface is,
That's cool.
it is cool that it got it once.
Mm-hmm.
After that, no matter what prompt I tried, no matter when I tried it, I did it throughout the next like 48-hour period of time. I would upload it, I would ask it to describe it, I'd use the same prompt, I'd set the same tone, I would be talking about other engine components, I would even say this is an engine component, and it would never again say that it was an intake manifold. Now, what's to me, this is interesting because there's a lot of people who will say that that
It's so
well,
reliable.
people aren't reliable either. They'll describe it differently. Well, maybe that's true that we might not ever describe the same image exactly the same way twice, right? But on the other hand, I do feel fairly confident that if I'm talking to the subject matter expert who knows what this part is, they will say, unless they're having a mental and episode or develop dementia, they're going to say every single time, this is that intake manifold from that Porsche motor, and I know that because it's that special 4-bolt pattern and so on. And the image I uploaded particularly doesn't show the 4-bolt pattern, so that makes it even like more obscure and more challenging. I will say that now you can search image snippets. I mean, you can Google site imagesnippets.com and say intake manifold, and that picture will show up because I have now put the metadata on it into the graph, right? And I've put that structured metadata on it, and it's now been indexed. That structured data has been indexed by Google, so it knows that that really is actually an intake manifold. But so the system does it is sort of, those wheels are churning. I mean, Google does look at more structured data than they used to, so those wheels are turning. And so images with that type of structured data that we add in image snippets is getting found in Google searches, where it comes if you just do a generic search for Porsche 1100cc intake manifold. I haven't tried that yet without using the site, imagesnippets.com, without being site specific. But so this is all challenging, though. I just feel like that type of metadata. One, I think it could have been there all along. I do think that we have techniques that go back 30 years.
Yeah.
We could have been putting money and time into, creating systems that would allow us to capture that kind of metadata, like, when images like that were being uploaded from the get-go. We haven't done that. And that's not how machine learning has evolved either. I mean, machine learning has evolved an entirely different way with computer vision. Like, so for example, that's where you can take, 100,000 images of maybe automotive parts, and you can say, this is an intake manifold and this is a camshaft, and it can learn the difference between an intake manifold and a camshaft. And it knows that now. But it's still not quite the same as having, then you throw something unusual at it and it, can it generalize beyond that?
So this is a static domain where things are produced. They're cast in metals and injection mold with plastic and all these things. This is a well-defined area.
Hmm.
Once it's produced, a manufacturer kind of has information, technical specifications, whatever. In botany, in the study of plants, that's a whole different dynamic subject matter altogether.
Oh yeah.
So, what do how do you think we can wrestle with that? And let me just add to this. It sucks that in the 30s we didn't have the advanced instrumentation that we have today. Now we live in an interconnected world where your camera, your phone, they can get a geolocation pin dropped where you take the picture and the time
Hmm.
and the weather conditions and all that can be interwoven into
Hmm.
the image.
Hmm.
Um, how does that play into expedition, scientific research, botany, and tracking life cycles of plants in different conditions?
Yeah, this is a really fascinating area. It's one that I've wanted to work deeper in, and I haven't really had an opportunity to work as deeply in. One, it's one that I don't necessarily I don't haven't um, that type of information doesn't necessarily stick easily in my head when I go out on a walk with my friends on a nature walk, and you're always with the friend that can point at something and go, well, that's houndstooth or something, and you can use that to dye clothes with, and you can do whatever. I'm just making stuff up out of the air. I don't have a lot of
It's like
special
cars.
knowledge about that, about botany, but I think it's really interesting. And one area that I have worked on with a couple of different people is on like species interaction, which I think is one of the areas where, for example, it's great, you can upload an image into iNaturalist, and it can identify a lot of things. There's a lot of plant ID programs out there. I don't know enough to be able to check the accuracy of those like I can with automotive parts. But I know that one of the things I sort of explored in iNaturalist is being able to describe multiple species in one image. So I think that for what I'd be interested in working on is where you're going a little bit deeper in being able to represent like the interactions between species, like being able to notate in the knowledge graph, like where like there's certain insects that hang out on these certain plants, and why it may be important to allow these plants to exist in like urban environments, is because you want to be able to control certain types of insects. And if you have this particular kind of plant, they said their insect feeds off of it or what have you, there's a reason why you may want to have that there. And I think that's the kind of information I'd like to work with in botany. I'd also like to work on seeds. I think there's a lot of really rich stuff that you could do with like preserving knowledge about non-GMO
Hereditary? No.
the
There's,
seeds. Yeah.
yeah, there's a word for that where it comes in from non-GMO species.
Yeah.
It's not gourmet.
Organic. I mean, it's not just organic. It's like, but they haven't been engineered. And there's people all over the world that are hiding these stashes of like real, like, of the seeds from plants that haven't been genetic.
Heirloom seeds.
Heirloom seeds.
That's what I
Yeah.
was looking for.
I think it'd be super. I really would love to work on a project that involves images of like the life cycles going from seeds and how they're germinated and everything up. And like I think it's super important because and what does a seed looks like? This is a field that I would love to learn more about. Yeah. So yeah.
So we're drawing towards the end of the conversation. We've covered a lot of ground, and I'm
Yeah,
really
we sure did.
deeply satisfied. Like intellectually, I consumed a lot from your rich world of dealing with images and human perception and how to make a human machine, how to cross that bridge for
Right.
humans and machines to communicate with images. Um, are there any parting words that you'd like to give to researchers that are working with imagery? Um, any any ideas or any information you'd like to kind of gift the audience around this space?
Um, I don't know. Parting words. That's hard. Well, I'm just happy to have been here to be able to talk about this work because I think it's really important. I think that truth is kind of really important. Truth and imagery is kind of accurately representing truth is important, and also being able to describe really complicated images, not your standard kind of
Plant, tree, cloud,
yeah.
sun.
Yeah, to be able to describe things deeply. And I love working on different projects with different people. I love all kinds of these topics. Anything that gets deep, is anything that gets deep, that's where I want to swim, sort of, is in that kind of territory. So I'd love to work on the projects with people. And I have a new donate button on so I would like to say, if anybody finds this interesting and fascinated, it would be much appreciated, because so I can keep doing research and keep paying developers and keep working on this work that I think is very valuable. And what else? Look for me on LinkedIn. I'm starting to do a lot of posts on LinkedIn about this type of material, and always looking for challenging things that showcase the importance of knowledge graphs, actually, and in representing this kind of knowledge. So um, that's about it, I guess. Thank you. This has been a lot of fun,
Thank
and
you, Margaret.
yeah. We can
Um,
talk about art the next time. I know
yeah,
you're really into like the Greek mythologies. I love that. And I also talk about that in images too, but we'll do that another day.
we're,
So, yeah.
we'll see if we can find you some patrons or matrons or
Yeah.
any sponsors.
Yeah. 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 That'd be great. Yeah. Right. So, yep. This has been a lot of fun.